Hey, leaders. In this episode of Leading Collaborative Response, I'm super excited to be joined by John Braga, a teacher from FG Miller Junior Senior High School in Elk Point, Alberta. Over the last 2 years, John has been part of the leadership team driving collaborative response at his school, bringing his unique blend of expertise in physics, education, and yes, spreadsheets to support his colleagues and students. We can't wait to dive into his journey and what collaborative response looks like at FG Miller. So let's get started.
Are you a leader who is navigating the nuances of leading collaborative response in your school or district? Are you unsure of what collaborative response is? Are you looking to understand the critical role leadership plays when establishing and refining a collaborative response approach?
Collaborative response began as a grassroots approach to focus on the needs of students through a framework of collaboration. That approach has grown to a movement that is training leadership and education.
Through the Leading Collaborative Response podcast, Kurtis and I share our own experiences of leading collaborative response and lessons learned as we continue to learn and gain insight through the experiences of working alongside others. We also have the opportunity to engage in conversations with school and divisional leaders implementing the framework in their own organizations.
We know great leaders build great teams because that is what every child deserves. Subscribe to the Leading Collaborative Response podcast and join the thousands of schools seeing success for students through intentional and focused collaborative efforts. Welcome to another episode of Leading Collaborative Response. As always, I'm Kurtis Hewson, co-founder and lead learner of Jigsaw Learning. Lorna is not available to be with us for this conversation, but I am excited to welcome John Braga to the podcast. For the past 11 years, John has been teaching junior high math and now language arts as well at FG Miller Junior Senior High School in St. Paul Regional Schools. In this episode, we'll explore John's experiences with collaborative response and the lessons their school has learned from implementing the framework. So let's jump in. John, so great to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, and I'm very excited for the conversation today and to present at the retreat later this year.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we put a link to that retreat because I know people are going to be excited at the work and the lessons learned at FG Miller. So before we jump into the FG Miller side of things, is there anything else that you'd love to share with our audience around your journey as an educator? I mean, I gave kind of the textbook bio, but what else can you do to fill in the blanks?
I think the only thing I'd add in is that I'm lucky enough I got to come back to my hometown school.
Yeah.
So I actually attended FG Miller myself and graduated from here back in 2004. And then after my time at university, got to come back home to my hometown. And some days I look around the classroom and feel a bit of a fraud because I'm like, this is Mrs. Bince's classroom. Like, what do they mean it's my room now? You know?
With that, then, did you have some former teachers that then became colleagues as well?
Yeah, about half the staff when I started 11 years ago had taught me. And now I'd say it's maybe about a quarter of the staff are left who have taught me as a student.
Okay. Oh, that's awesome. Well, and I know that that gives just even more drive and desire to really make the school a great place for kids when it's part of your childhood experience as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the school. We know you're located in Elk Point, which is up in kind of north, I guess it would be east-ish Alberta, but give us a little bit of understanding around the community, the school, what grades you serve, just anything to give the audience an idea of what does FG Miller look like.
So FG Miller is a grade 7 to 12 school with a current population of about 200. Directly across the street from us is the elementary school, so K to 6.
Okay.
And the name FG Miller is in recognition of a doctor who taught in town long ago, because there had been a move decades ago to try and consolidate us in and bus the kids to St. Paul and have all of the senior high kids in the county go to school still in the same building. But it was through his advocacy that we kept K to 12 in the town of Elk Point rather than busing the kids out. And it's sort of, there's a lot of pride in the community that our kids stay here all the way till graduation. But there is a bit of challenge with that with enrollment numbers in the present. In about the last 6 years, there has been declined population in the community. So we used to have a capacity up in the high 200s. And each year, there's a gradual reduction in enrollment. And this year was our first time ever. We'd only had one batch of grade 7s coming in rather than 2 batches of each grade. And there's a lot of thinking about how this changes the school and how we can try to continue to offer the same breadth of option programs and the same quality of education that we've prided ourselves for historically in a case where the town's population is shrinking.
Yeah. Well, and I really think that alludes to what I think all of us experience in education is you can't do the same thing year over year because things change. We could have enrollment increases, decreases, change of staff. You can't expect to run the exact same system and program and not attend to those changes that are ongoing.
Absolutely. And even within the same year, treating each of the classes differently. I had just the week before the Christmas break, some of the grade 12s came around doing a survey for language arts class. And they asked the question, what's your favorite grade? And the politician that I am, I'm like, well, I love the grade 7s for this reason. I love the grade 8s for that reason, the grade 9s for that reason, because they're all different and they each have their own personality as a group and as individuals. And so that's one of the absolute blessings I count about being in a small town and a small school is I get to know the kids quite personally. And for most of our staff, they have the kids for the whole 6 years. They, in some capacity, teach them from 7 to 12. Some of our senior high -1 teachers just see them for senior high. And I'm the only one in the building who's strictly a junior high teacher. So 3 to 6 years experience getting to establish that relationship, really understand the kids as individuals, and provide them that long-term encouragement and nurturing so they reach their full potential.
Interesting. So I want to jump into the collaborative response work, and I'm going to come at it from a certain angle. So just to share out with the audience, the school division, St. Paul Regional, had determined this would be the second year that all of our schools were adopting collaborative response and understanding that it's going to be a journey and each school will be at different places, but we're going to learn along the way. So, John, one of the interesting things that I often see within this work is especially in smaller schools where you have the absolute gift of knowing your students intimately, as you described, we sometimes hear why do we need this collaborative response stuff? We already know and respond to our kids so well. I'd love to know for you, where did that aha moment came? Because I know through our interactions how invested you are in the work and what it looks like at FG Miller, but when was that little aha moment for you? Can you describe that?
Well, I think as you posed the question, I actually had 2 different aha moments with it. So the one there was really the careful framing you did around the data and evidence component of collaborative response, because one of the risks in a small town school when you know the kids so well is you sit down in a staff meeting and talk about the same kids again and again. And so using the data and evidence piece to carefully flag, these are the students in that second quartile, and then using this intentional selection of a student from that group to then frame what's the topic or the issue we need to discuss and try to solve, that has been so productive for the staff. Because then rather than just talking about the same frequent flyers again.
And in that situation, I assume you would have well, I taught his sister. You might even have, I taught
Yes.
Father.
Well, and actually, as a weird anecdote, I have loved the first day of school that a lot of the kids have had a habit of bringing their younger siblings to introduce them.
Yeah.
So this year, the first day of grade 7, there was a grade 11 boy brought his grade 7 sister to my room, and he said, "This is Mr. Braga. Your life will go easier if you take his advice."
Yeah.
And like when you have a sibling endorsement like that, that
Yeah.
really helps kickstart the relationship and make it easier to build, because you're not just meeting the kid from scratch. You get to borrow some of their siblings' credibility.
Yeah. So that coming back to that data and evidence, utilizing that, you found shifted the, I guess, the focus of some of the conversations that have
Absolutely.
been historically happening.
Yeah, because when we were looking at our color-coded spreadsheets with the data, we found that a lot of the kids in that first quartile, they have complex needs and a lot of things going on with them.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to actually have a conversation about addressing one thing, staff are constantly bringing up, well, what about this component, or what about this concern?
Yeah.
Whereas when we're having that conversation about kids in the second quartile, the issues seem a lot simpler and more manageable. So
Yeah.
then when we talk about classroom strategies to support the kids, it's a lot easier to make headway in the conversation and come to some productive decisions going forward. And then you have the benefit that those solutions will apply to more than just those kids you're talking about.
Beautiful.
So it really helps simplify the conversation and make it more productive.
Yeah. So, John, you mentioned a second aha that came there as well. What did that involve?
Well, I think it was, for me, talking with the colleagues I have in my building, we sort of self-describe at times like we're kind of the rebellious teenager who just wants to close their door and be left alone. Because a lot of the schools within our division, they seem to be this very happy, smiley elementary school type vibe.
Yeah.
Whereas our building is sort of this more angsty, study 10 hours a day, high school type vibe.
Mhm.
And so with it, there's just this natural, because of the community and because of our age group, skepticism of everything that comes from central office. Because it's like, Mom and Dad, you can't tell me what to do. I know what I want to do.
Yeah.
And my big aha moment, the first one I had, was in your first session that you led for us in central office among all the leadership teams. Understanding what that exercise we did about understanding what is collaborative response and what is it not. And the way I took away from that exercise is collaborative response is about being collegial. It's not about being managerial. And so it's about recognizing that we are all well-educated, passionate, invested people. And as colleagues, we can come together, collaborate with each other, and work on solutions, rather than a managerial model where the principal says, I'm the boss, I'll tell you what to do, off we'll go. And so that collegiality really fit with the attitude that a lot of our teachers have. And we're like, when you tell your colleagues, like trying to get the buy-in and the investment from the other people in the building, hey, we recognize through this structure that we're going to come together, pool our thoughts, pool our knowledge, pool our creativity, and then the self-volunteering for action items, saying, okay, this discussion we've had, I can go away and accomplish this, or someone else says they can go away and accomplish that. When we focus on that collegiality and that being able to work as a team, it just fits our culture so well, and it made it so much more efficient. The phrase that we've been using is sort of collaborative response has allowed us to formalize and to broaden the instincts we already had in the building.
Oh, I love that.
It's taken our natural talents and attitude and strengthened it through that formalization and increasing the breadth of how we do collaborate.
Oh, that is awesome. So, John, I want to get into the weeds a little bit because I know that this will be in the retreat session getting really specific, but just to help our audience know, let's start with the collaborative structures and processes. So we talk about those 4 layers of team. What does that look like within your school? Who's involved? When does it happen? How have you gone about constructing that as a team?
Awesome. So for us, for our tier 1 and our tier 2 teams, we've actually got them as two halves of the same meeting.
Okay.
So on our professional development days, we have three teams that get together: our numeracy team, the literacy team, and the wellness team.
Okay.
And they're intentionally staggered in time. That way there's cross-pollination. People can go to different teams if they want. And the way we have it set up is our principal is assigned everyone to your mandatory home team, and
Okay.
then you can choose to go elsewhere. So some of our staff attend all three team meetings.
Okay.
I'm assigned to numeracy, but I also voluntarily go to literacy. And in those meetings, the first half hour, we do those tier 1 universal conversations.
Okay.
And then in the second half of the meeting, we switch to those tier 2 student support discussions.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so
And
then with that, the tier 2, that's where it is I've brought Dylan and
yes,
the issue I'm experiencing is X. But in that first half hour, it might be we're working together on enhancing some numeracy instructional practices that we've been
absolutely.
working on.
Absolutely. And it feels like those first half of the meeting, the tier 1, we've just found out information that impacts all of our students. How do we make sense and implement it? So some of the changes around PAT exams and diploma exams,
Yeah.
some of the things around, like even as simple as textbook sign out, having conversations during the literacy team about how those resources are accessed and used by students. And so I guess we're still working through the process of figuring out what exactly should be a tier 1 topic of discussion.
Yeah.
But the rule of thumb so far has been news we need to respond to that impacts all the kids.
Yeah. Okay. So then, and you described the collaborative team meeting. About how often do those professional learning days happen? Are they essentially one a month type?
So
Generally?
it's altered this year. So last year, our school board's calendar had the PD days really well spaced out, and they were about once every 3 to 5 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
This year, our PD days are very second semester heavy.
Okay.
So we've had a couple after school meetings to sort of plug the gaps in the first semester.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
everyone's really looking forward to second semester when we're back to once a month PD sessions, and we
Gotcha.
can do them within those work days.
Okay, so you described those first two layers related to tier 1, tier 2. How about the school support team, that third level? What does that look like in the school and who's involved in that?
So that's one that we're very proud of our plan and our structure. We are challenged by the implementation.
Of course.
So the plan for that tier 3 support team meeting is we've got our principal, our assistant principal, the coordinator of student supports, the family school liaison worker, essentially the school counselor, and then the career counselor.
Okay.
And the 5 of them plan to meet twice a month. But one of the challenges of being in a small town school is that there might be a central office meeting called, or
Right.
someone's out, because not only are they part of administration, they wear classroom duties and responsibilities.
Yeah.
And so those meetings often have one or two person missing. And one of the challenges we've really had over the last about 10 months, where we've been trying to solidify that tier 3 team, is that they're like, oh, well, we don't want to go ahead with someone. We'll reschedule to when all 5 of us can be there.
Right.
And then that ends up being a game of dominoes, and it's the next meeting by the time you can get everyone together.
Right.
So it's something that we've been trying really hard to figure out how to make that work logistically. And it has been like the tier 1 and 2 ones, the logistics of that have gone so smooth and beautifully. And the tier 3 ones, it pose a continuing challenge.
Yeah. Well, and to me, I think it's fantastic for anyone listening or viewing this to be able to understand that, yeah, you accomplish one piece of this and there's going to be, okay, now here's our next piece to refine, tweak, to tackle. And yeah, even seeing in your voice and body language of, well, this isn't a barrier. It's just our next thing that we need to figure out.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah. And then I believe the last one then is those tier 4 sort of case response meetings.
Yeah.
And with them, it's we joke within our building that essentially that team is our principal plus ad hoc whoever he's going to pull
Whoever
in.
needs to be drawn in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's like when crisis happens and there needs to be a response and all of that. So that has been really good because out of those sessions that you've run in central office for us, we've had a lot of made lists of what needs to be in place, what needs to be thought about carefully for those tier 4 meetings to go smoothly and well. And the principal has made a lot of progress on it, but it's also every single one of those tier 4 meetings feels unique in a sense, because even with the right framework in mind and understanding how he wants them to run, every time you call a tier 4 meeting, it's for a different reason, different child, and often for an emergent thing that we hadn't pre-planned for. Because I think this is one of the things I personally love about the collaborative response model is, to me, the tiers also seem very much correlated with how proactive we can be.
Yes.
So if it's a tier 1 issue, we can see some of those months in ahead or a semester ahead, make some plans, get ready as we go. And then as things work up, it feels like those, by the time you get to tier 3, you're doing some proactive stuff and some reactive stuff.
Yeah.
And then by the time you get up to tier 4, it feels like it's a lot of reactive. And then how can we use that reaction to carefully plan for the future so this particular situation doesn't come up again? We could be more proactive about it in the future. But the nature of education is we're always going to have a new situation we've never seen before.
Oh, there'll always be some reason for that.
Totally.
You know, John, I had never thought of it as succinctly as what you just put there. Like, I've talked about those layers of team that as you move from, well, and let's go from tier 1 to tier 4, that alignment that you're very clearly have made, the conversation intensifies, administration's involvement increases, the focus on classroom practice probably decreases as you're moving forward. But I love that idea of movement from proactive to reactive. And that whole idea is if we can get really good at some of our tier 1, 2, and then even 3, we should have less of the one student at a time reactive over time.
Yeah, well, because you've had in those sessions you've presented to us, you've come up several times with that saying you have of have one more meeting to have fewer meetings.
Yeah.
And every time I quote you on that, I change it a little bit. So when I'm talking to my colleagues, I say it have one more proactive meeting to reduce our number of reactive meetings.
Oh, I love that.
And that's really had like a lot of resonance. The first time I said that to our principal, where I'm like, I think this is what Kurtis means by the saying he's been saying.
Yeah.
My principal loved it. He's like, that's exactly the point of what we're up to. And so, and like as a kid growing up in the area, my grandma always said to me, a pinch of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Yeah. And that's part of what's so appealing about the collaborative response model is it gives us a framework for these conversations where we can be intentional and proactive and then reduce, like you said, how many of those issues rise to the point of needing a tier 4 response.
Absolutely. So, John, we always like being within this podcast of being forthright and transparent around this work isn't all rainbows and sunshine. There's difficulties that come within it. It's not easy work. The payoff is substantial, but there's efforts and energies that come. So love for you to share what have been some of the challenges, and you've alluded to some already, but some of the challenges and then more. I actually would love to even more know what if some things that you've done to overcome some of those challenges you've encountered, because let's be clear, there's challenges that will come up in this work, undoubtedly.
For sure. So I would say our first and biggest challenge was really getting staff buy-in.
Yeah.
And I have to include myself as part of the trouble at the very beginning. So a year and a half ago, we started with you gave a presentation to all the staff in the school board. And we had walked away with that, with our school's sort of curmudgeon-y attitude of, oh, central office wants us to do one more thing.
They've got another thing we're doing. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know for me personally, a year and a half ago, we're talking about just recently, a couple years after COVID. And I hit a lot of burnout and cynicism during COVID because it felt like sometimes literally twice a week, there's a new directive from Edmonton
Yep.
or there's a new directive from St. Paul. And it felt like a lot of whiplash. And it became very difficult because I know I do good stuff in my room. Why someone from Edmonton giving me new marching orders and whiplash every week?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of us 2 years ago were in this mode of please just leave me alone so I can do good work with my kids.
Yeah.
And I shared with you my aha moment where the principal took me as part of the leadership team. I don't have a leadership role in my building outside of collaborative response, but what he did was he said that he felt my mindset and skill set would mesh well with what we needed to do. So I went to that first leadership meeting in St. Paul, initially very skeptical, and you managed to get me to have that aha moment and buy-in in the first 15 minutes there.
Yeah.
And so then the next 8 months, really, I'd say it took most of last year to gradually get the buy-in and that similar aha moment from our staff. Because much as you could tell the same message to everyone,
Yeah.
when you're sitting in a group setting, it doesn't hit personally in the same way. And what I feel like we got the buy-in by a slow, gradual coffee cup diplomacy. You sit down with a colleague, you talk about this is how I see collaborative response benefiting my personal classroom practice. And then they have epiphanies and they share what they see they can contribute. And that enthusiasm sort of percolates out gradually. And so part of how we formally did that was we started with our numeracy team right in the fall last year, partially because
And just one team to start.
yes, just one team at the beginning. I think November was our first meeting that year because we had a pre-meeting in October where the team got together, had a conversation about what is the collaborative response, what do we want to try and do. The team drafted their norms. We sort of took that time to say what will a meeting look like in October, and then in November we actually met. And I think it was February by the time our wellness team met last year.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it that at the time we didn't realize it would do, but was phenomenal, was that gradual lead time allowed there to be sort of a buzz and an enthusiasm build. And a lot of people started saying, well, what's numeracy doing? What's it look like? And we said, well, come on in, sit, observe a meeting, see what it's like. And then people would go away and be like, oh, I can't wait until literacy's doing that, or I can't wait till wellness could do it. So as the other two teams came online, that gave enough time for people to see good things in action, to believe in the process, and then by the time they sat down, they were invested in it. But we did have one challenge, which was, regrettably, we had one staff member who missed your August presentation last year to the whole board, and they missed the norm setting meeting for the numeracy team. And that became a major difficulty because they had missed both those training sessions. They didn't understand big picture what was collaborative response about.
Right.
And they came first to that first formal meeting, and it really was derailed. It was a whole bunch of, we're trying to follow the norms, but this staff member who didn't understand the norms was trying to have meetings like we used to have in the pre-collaborative response paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And it went to a lot of our leadership team in the building, had a lot of conversations about, well, how'd that go sideways so quick? What went on? And we realized, well, it's simply a matter of you can't just push someone in the pool and say swim. You have to give training. You have to give floaties. So part of what we did sort of as a life preserver is we created the role of an observer for our collaborative response meetings. And we have, for all of our different roles like facilitator, note taker, and all of that, on the back of their role cards, They have the norms that everyone in the team is expected to follow, and they have the duties that their particular role is contributing during that meeting. And so by creating the observer card, we were able to formalize and say, okay, you're someone who has not experienced the collaborative response process yet. Here's the norms we're all abiding by. And as an observer, here are your responsibilities. So it says for us individually as an observer, I make a commitment to listen attentively to the discussion, focusing on understanding the collective team norms and goals, understanding an individual team role if intending to fulfill that role in the future, reflecting on how to positively contribute to the team in future meetings, and to seek clarification after the meeting if there's confusion about the collective team norms and goals or my future individual role. And that increased the number of people who wanted to come and watch the different meetings, because it sort of gave a permission to say, no pressure, no expectations, sit in on what numeracy is doing. So by the time that wellness had their first meeting, more than 2/3 of them had sort of job shadowed at numeracy. Yeah. And a lot of the growing pains that we had getting that first team off the ground, the other two teams didn't experience at all. And then when literacy was launched as our third and last of those tier 1 to tier 2 meetings, I had a lot of jealousy because literacy launched so smoothly that I felt their first meeting was more smooth and productive than any numeracy meeting we had in the 10 months before.
So basically, you got to traipse through the mud in order to blaze a path for others to be able to follow without getting quite as muddy as the first group.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely in the spirit of the collaborative response.
100%.
Take a look at my colossal failure. Please avoid it. Save yourself some pain if you can manage to.
Now, for anyone that's listening to this podcast, you missed John holding up some roll cards, the tent cards, essentially. But John, I'm going to reach out if you'd be willing to share those as a sample. I'd love to be able to show them or place them in the show note, because genius.
I think it's already in the dashboard.
Okay, I will go explore.
If you can't get them from there, send me an email and I'll pass them on to you as PDFs.
Awesome. Okay, so John, you talked about the utilization of data, and I know from our conversations, you are incredibly adept at being able to put that data into a usable space, into a spreadsheet that's color-coded, that really allows your teacher teams to focus on the what are we going to do about the data, not the what is happening in the data.
Yes.
So I do want to move to then that continuum of supports. And I know through our conversations, you've talked about different ways to document and had shared with me at one point in time a really robust collection that says if key issue is X, here's some possibilities that we've done, and kind of drafting out almost playbooks. But can you describe what that third component of continuum of supports has looked like,
yes,
continues to look like, and what you envision as a school as you move forward? We'll be right back to continue this episode. Are you looking to maximize the collaborative capacity of your school or district? Are you wanting to take your professional learning communities or response to intervention work to the next level? Have you started the work in collaborative response but are looking to reignite or deepen your plans? We would love to have you join us at the 2025 Collaborative Response Retreat happening May 2nd and 3rd in beautiful Lacombe, Alberta.
Over the 2 days, we have an intentionally designed program of breakout sessions and sharing, along with supported team planning time to ensure that you walk away with a plan for introducing or strengthening collaborative response in your organization for the upcoming year. With a concentrated focus on team planning, networking, and individualized support for your school, the Collaborative Response Retreat is an outstanding opportunity to grow your team's understanding and implementation of this powerful support framework. We are also planning some fun time so you can relax and enjoy activities as a team in our historic community of Lacombe in central Alberta.
In addition, participants will gain access to an extensive repository of online resources to deepen their understanding and support ongoing implementation. Plan to join a growing network of educators dedicated to responding to the diverse needs of their learners. We've capped our attendance at 140 participants, so make sure to register early to secure your team spot. We're looking forward to seeing you in Lacombe in May. And now back to our conversation.
For sure. So our continuum of supports is currently in the middle of being torn up for the third time and re-envisioned in its fourth incarnation.
Yeah.
And it's something that I am taking immense joy in, but it's been interesting because you make a little bit of progress and then you're like, oh dear, if we had visualized it this way from the beginning, it all would have been smoother. But if I could I'll try to be brief, but if I could try to briefly go over the 3 stages we've had so far and what the future looks like. Our first version of the continuum actually started 7 years ago before we ever knew about collaborative response.
That's right.
And where it began was we had at the time our coordinator of student supports. She was a consummate professional, and she absolutely lived and breathed providing those supports for students who needed them. And I was taken a lot under her wing because I struggle with patience at times. So I'd go to her and I'd be like, I'm trying to teach this child math and they can't even show up with their textbook. Like, how can I teach them math if their materials are physically not even in the room with them?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had what we professionally called our list of fundamental student skills. Informally, I called it things that John whines about. And it ended up being a list of about a dozen different student needs that if the student couldn't address them, they reduced their opportunity to actually learn in the classroom. So stuff like emotional regulation around anxiety, emotional regulation around temper, showing up with appropriate materials, attending to schedules, and planning out their schedule appropriately when triaging. And we had broken that down into 3 levels. Our tier 1 was what I, as the teacher, could do. Tier 2 was what my EA in the classroom could support the child doing. And tier 3 was when we had to go outside the classroom and get the EA's support.
Yeah.
And so then when we went to the collaborative response meetings and you first introduced to that leadership team meeting the idea of the continuum of supports and how those tiered responses go, we basically took our old wine and put it into new wineskins.
Yeah.
So version 2 for us then became, this isn't just the coordinator of student support and the math department working together. We're going to re-envision this as a resource for the whole building as well then.
It must have felt, though, at that point of, hey, we've got some stuff around. We're not starting from scratch in this room.
Absolutely. And I think in general, that's been part of why we've had such good buy-in from our staff is like the data and evidence piece. Our principal has a math background. And so for his entire time as principal, he's been show me the data, show me the numbers. And so our staff are used to using that component as part of the conversation. Yeah. And same with this continuum here, people had heard me and the coordinator of student supports talking about it for years, guiding a lot of our decision making and documenting what we were using as supports in junior high math. And so it was easy to take that and reword it. And actually our current student of support, coordinator of student supports, when she looked at our second version of the continuum, so first draft of second version, where we redid it with the 4 tiers, we redid it to be school-wide. She looked at it and she's like, wow, like it amazed her to see everything we were already doing, because at that point we weren't even brainstorming anything new. We were, like I had used that phrase before, formalize and broaden. We were formalizing and broadening what we were already doing. And then it feels good when you can look at your building and say, wow, we already have so many successes. And it's like in sports, you get a win, it's easier to play harder in the next game and get the next win. And when you're on a winning streak, you're like, let's see how long we can keep this winning streak going. Yeah. And so collaborative response has really felt like that a lot for our building, where we're like, wow, we're awesome. We're already doing amazing thing for our kids. Let's go and also win the next game we play.
Yeah, awesome. So what do you envision that the continued iterations of your continuums looking like, John?
So where we got up for, because what you had mentioned was the version 2 we had, where we were sort of flow charting, if this is the issue we're trying to address, flow charting up the different supports to get there. So we're currently on version 3, which is what we had done was, I love a good spreadsheet. And we had an extremely cold week in January last year. We had no buses running for 3 days in a row. And so I was under control in my class at the time. So I went and talked to the principal and I said, I want to take a bunch of this snow day time and work on our continuum. And you have on your website somewhere between 20 and 24 exemplars online. Mm-hmm. I read every one of those exemplars 3 times, cross-referenced what I saw in all of the ones in those different buildings, and then we typed up version 3 of our continuum, which lives on my classroom wall here.
Oh, and I'm going to ask you, I'm going to go into the dashboard to grab that sample.
Perfect.
Too, if that's possible, John.
Absolutely. And so what we have with the continuum then is it says at the top, we will support students such that they can learn, grow, and thrive. And then across the continuum, this right now in version 3 just defines what the issues we have that we're trying to address. Mm-hmm. And then the goal is that each box there will be hyperlinked to the resources with the tiered responses of how we support them. Going across the top here in red, we have universal student needs. So basic stuff like, have the students got food and water, shelter and rest, clothing and hygiene, and psychological needs like, do they have access to social work if they need, access to healthcare, access to education? And this is how we reframe the question around attendance, because a lot of teachers said attendance is a challenge and an issue. If the kid isn't here, how can we actually teach them? But reframing that instead is talking about access to education, because some of our kids really do want to be here, but they get rides from, say, Auntie to get to school, and they don't consistently arise. So the question is, how can we make sure that kid has access to the opportunity for an education? And then also sense of community. Does the student feel like they belong and are accepted within the student school community? And then it moves along here to behavioral skills. So do the kids have the social emotional skills to self-regulate? Do they have the executive functioning skills to plan and carry through a task? Then in green, we have our literacy skills, and those are split up into nonverbal skills. Can they read facial expressions, body language, all of that? Then orality, can they listen and speak and communicate information that way? And then traditional literacy, can they read and write and communicate information that way? And then up to the numeracy team skills. So we split those into quantitative and qualitative. So qualitative first, do they have the skills to classify and sort? Do they have sense of space and time in relative sense? Quantitatively, do they have counting and measurement? And do they recognize number and a pattern and can apply them? And then we don't have teams for this, but we're imagining in the future, part of our problem is in a small school, our math department is 2 people. Yeah. Our science department is 3 people. So imagining if we were in a larger building, if we had departmental meetings that would act parallel to the literacy, numeracy, and wellness, because there's study skills that are particular to different disciplines and how they work. Also wanting to foster lifelong learning skills in the kids, so both the motivation and the ability for them to identify things they want to learn and find appropriate resources for themselves so that they can learn throughout their life without having someone external set that up for them. And of course, teamwork skills, the ability to do that all together collaboratively with other people. And then lastly, specific curricular skills. Do they have the prerequisite knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary to build upon? And so at this stage where we're sitting at with version 3 of our curriculum, we feel like we've really well defined all of those little white boxes. Each of them individually is a skill our students need support on. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to do with moving to version 4 is how do we take all of those supports we have in place and the supports we aspire to, we would like to put in place in the future. We want to have for each of those boxes hyperlinked to a document with the specific tiered supports for those. But I think one of the big challenges of being a small town school is how many staffing hours are available to do the stuff like documenting there. So we have all of these things that we are doing and have thought about coming out of those collaborative team meetings. And our documentation then right now looks like a whole bunch of exploded bins. And how do we take all of that and put it in a nice, easy to access place? Yeah. And so with the principal, his long-term dream is he would like to have that printed out and on the walls for each of the teachers in the building so that we have that shared vocabulary when we're talking about it. Right now, it mostly lives digitally because I constantly go and tweak stuff because you have conversations with people and then we're like, oh yes, it is more productive if we frame it this way. For example, changing the conversation around attendance to does the kid have access to educational opportunities? Then it feels less like we're blaming the kid for not attending and more like we're trying to support them in accessing that opportunity.
We're looking at from a support mindset.
Absolutely. And so when the plan is when we get version 4 figured out, there'd be a poster like that printed in color for each classroom so the teachers and students can use a common vocabulary. And also a version of that would live on the home bar of everyone's webpage so that they can use it as a hyperlinked document. When they're saying, oh, I am struggling with this kid. Why am I? They go to that page, read through it and realize, oh, these are the 4 or 5 boxes that I'm struggling with the kid with, and then click on it. And within that link, it will have the supports particular to that skill or need that we're talking about. And I think another aha moment for our principal was this was back around March last year. He had a particularly challenging day as a principal with one of our junior high kids. Mm-hmm. And so he pulled me aside after school and said, hey, can I take a moment to just vent to you? And we provide that emotional support to our colleagues sometimes because when we have a rough day, you got to get through it somehow. And so he started talking about 3 seconds and I said, can you pause and come with me to the continuum for a moment? And as he talked about the kid, he would say, this happened today and this happened today. And we ended up pointing about 6 things on the continuum where we're like, these are 6 boxes that kid is challenged with today. And then when he had said that, I said, hey, isn't this interesting? Notice these 3 boxes. That kid used to have issues with those in September, October. But they don't anymore because the kid's grown and mature. They're better able to self-regulate. They're better able to do this. And suddenly the conversation turned from what the kid had done that day that was frustrating into but look how much they've grown since they've arrived to us. And it completely turned what had started as I need to get something off my chest into a quite optimistic conversation of we have seen growth in this child. And that provides the optimism that we will see future growth in the child.
Yeah. We'll be right back to continue this episode.
Feeling overwhelmed with the expectations being placed on teachers, leaders, and educational systems to respond to the diverse needs of our learners?
Are you wanting to take your PLCs and RTI efforts to the next level?
It definitely takes a highly coordinated framework of structures and processes to maximize the collective capacity of your team to ensure success for all students. Collaborative Response is that framework.
Order your copy of our bestseller, Collaborative Response, 3 foundational components that transform how we respond to the needs of learners, which includes access to a comprehensive companion website. Join the thousands of schools using the framework to ensure high levels of success for students and staff. And now back to our conversation. Oh my goodness, there's so much to unpack there, John, and I just want to reinforce this idea of, we could create a version of that, put it on the website and say, hey, look, schools, you don't have to do any work. This is already made for you. But as you've talked about, we have to own it as our school and make it ours and have it really reflect what do we do within this building? What are we successful at? What are we challenged with? But you're bang on 2 things there. First, getting that common vocabulary of what does response look like in our school is a critical part that you are doing in spades through that process. And the second part of that is being able to clearly articulate what are the supports so that when we, exactly from what your principal experienced, rather than saying, oh, so what could we do? And throwing up our hands to going to this resource and saying, okay, what could we do? What could be our next step?
Well, but I think I would put a step in between them, because the middle step is that what have we already done?
Yeah, that's great.
Like, it's something I find that our superintendent is really good at, is recognizing that we've already done great stuff. I mean, we are passionate, trained individuals who have many years of experience. Actually, I kind of got in trouble at our staff meeting in August because I'd added up. I'm like, there's more than 200 years experience in the building. Everyone's like, we're not that old yet. No, and some people are like, individually, definitely not. But that recognizing how much we've already done for our students and recognizing how much our students have already grown, because part of that privilege of being a small town school is when you have that kid for 3 to 6 years, you can look back at that growth and feel incredibly proud. Like, I have one right now. We have one of our grade 11 boys. Oh, he caused me gray hair in grade 7. Because back when he was in grade 7, he was quite stubborn and reluctant to receive feedback. And he and I went around in circles until February of grade 8. He had an epiphany. He started listening to me. And so much growth happened between the end of grade 8 and the end of grade 9. And then now watching him in grade 11 and just seeing, you would not imagine it's the same student. And I think part of it is you put in that work to get the relationship, and then eventually the kid starts taking advice, and you see the evidence of how much the kid has grown over years. And that leaves more hope for how much he'll continue to grow in the year and a half he has left till graduation. And then ideally, imagining how much they will do through post-secondary or lifelong learning, like seeing the kids and being in a building where they're in the hallway, you bump into the grade 12s, and they'll say to you, hey, Mr. Braga, this is where I'm planning to go to college or university, what I want to do with my life, or off to trade school. And being able to say to them, oh, that's awesome. Like, I remember when you mentioned this in grade 8 and you're still interested now.
Yeah.
And they're like, yep. And then a lot of them are really good at acknowledging that advice has to come at the right time.
Yep.
So a lot of those senior high kids will say, oh yeah, we remember in junior high when the teachers were trying to get us to do this. Finally, we see why, and having that conversation with the older kids provides that sense of fulfillment of, oh yeah, all those hard work and hard hours we put in junior high, the kid may not have got it right away, but it does make a difference. They do listen, and when they're ready, they will appreciate those supports that we put in. It's on their individual timeline as a
Yeah.
kid.
So, John, I'm going to utilize your words to encapsulate that because really what you're doing through your collaborative response work is formalizing and broadening that
Mhm.
exact scenario that you've talked about, where this doesn't just happen through occasional self-reflection. We're doing that in every collaborative team meeting,
Yes.
being able to say, what's the success we've seen since the last time? And then more importantly, and what did we do that led to that
Mhm.
specifically?
And that's, I think, one of the things I'm personally most excited about is for our February meetings come up. Because our school board has implemented this year that we've done historically literacy testing at the beginning and the end of the year. This year, we're also doing at the mid-year with numeracy and literacy. So
Okay.
at the end of January, we're going to be collecting some data and we'll be able to look at the growth we've seen over the last 5 months and then pick apart that at our February collaborative response meeting. And I feel like it's interesting because it's going to be twofold. At the tier one level, we're going to have discussions about how did implementation go? How did it work? What we need to do differently for next year in January or for June's third and final assessment of the year, those really proactive pieces. And then the tier two conversations will be about specific kids in that second quartile
Yeah.
and seeing what does the data tell us. So what worked? What do we need to try doing differently? And sort of picking apart what it implies for our future practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John, we're reaching a point in the podcast where we always like asking two consistent questions. And the first one's not really a question, it's a finish this statement. So, can you finish this statement for me? As a result of collaborative response, we have seen, how would you go about finishing that, thinking about FG Miller's experience?
Oh, so much. I think one that to me is most personally impactful is we've seen support staff feel validated and involved in the decision making process. One of the things we saw specifically was sitting down with our career counselor and talking about where she fit in within the continuum and what support she provides to the students. And she said it was really impactful. Like it really meant an enormous amount for her to realize she's part of the system and part of the process. She doesn't meet the kids in the classroom, but she's still an essential part of the components that get the students ready for their post grade 12 life.
Mhm.
And so many cases like that where our support staff get to see and recognize they have vital roles in providing tier two and tier three supports. And that sense of confidence that it brings has been amazing.
Oh, that's
Another thing that I've seen that I just personally absolutely love and appreciate is I feel like there's an opening of the staff. There's sort of a more open dialogue because for it we've always sort of mutually recognized that we're strong compassionate people who are working hard to help the students as well as we can, but it's often felt like silos. Like over my 11 years here in the building, I've often heard colleagues describe it as feeling like I am the English department or I am the chemistry department.
yeah.
And even though we know we share a lot of experiences with the students in the building, it could feel very isolating because there's no one else in the building doing quite the same thing as you.
Yeah.
Even me and my colleague, who's the senior high math teacher, we have a two-person math department, but it doesn't even feel like we're doing the same thing. Where junior high and senior high feel very differently. And so, what collaborative response has done is in those team meetings, and then even in hallway and staff room conversations outside of those meetings, collaborative response emphasizes the similarities in what we're doing and
Yeah.
emphasizes that our goals and our intentions are the exact same. How it implements is very diverse. So I think it's collaborative response has really helped to unify our purpose in the building while maintaining the diversity of responses we have in our individual classrooms.
That is exceptionally well said. Thank you so much for that, John. Last question, and this one is a little bit of a self-reflection exercise. In the spirit of if you knew then what you know now, What advice would you give your past self? And you've already talked about your year and a half ago self. What advice would you give that um, past self in relation to the collaborative response work?
There is a ton of advice I'd give, but I think a tender one that to me feels really special is having the facilitator identify a norm to focus on for the meeting.
Mm,
We didn't start doing that until I think around April of last year. And the impact that had on a meeting, I can't even describe. Because having the facilitator, like we have our norms here. And when someone says, like, I would like us to focus for today's meeting, that we're all contributing to a welcome, caring, safe, and inclusive collaborative environment. It just, we have a moment to think on that and then to reflect on our role in the team and how we can put that norm front and center for that meeting. And it really brings out the personality of the facilitator. And it really feels like it unifies our purpose before
mhm.
we go into the meeting. And I feel like it just, the vibes have felt so good since we've adopted that practice.
Awesome, John. Well, I have to say, I am so excited having this conversation with you. You and I have a chance to interact on our days, but certainly not to this level of time or extent. And this has been an absolute pleasure. So I want to say thank you. And if people have any questions or anything, can I include your email address to be able to reach
Sure,
out
if you'd
if
like
there's
to, for sure.
questions? Okay, I will
Absolutely.
do so. And I'll look at collecting a few different samples to throw into show notes for people to see as well. But really excited to have you come and join us in Lacombe in May. I know there's going to be a lot of people that are going to benefit from the work that's happening at FG Miller and the insights that you've gathered through this process. So thank
Yes.
you.
And thank you very much. And I have to say, I am excited for the retreat, not just to present and hopefully save people some of the growing pains we experienced, but also I'm really excited for that mutual collaboration of learning from my other colleagues from across Western Canada or where they're coming from,
Awesome.
because it's going to be really exciting to learn from them as well.
Yeah, and I think you will be satisfied through that process as well. So, wishing you all the best, John. Thank you so much for your time and take care.
You as well. Bye.
Thank you. All right, so we've reached this point in our podcast where opportunity to reflect and synthesize some of the key learning that comes. And I said to John off camera that, boy, I wish I had his gift of articulate speech and succinctness of message. Really a pleasure. And there's some things that I took away. I loved when John talked about this is a way that we formalize and broaden things that we already are doing, things that we know are working. And I think that's a really critical thing to understand. I'm taking away with me and sharing with others that idea of the observer role in meetings, of that gradual release of I guess responsibility to be able to come and say your role is as an observer as we learn this process. First, I thought that was absolutely genius. I really loved his addition to my language and what my wife and I have talked about, and is included in the text, that idea of we have one more meeting to reduce the number of meetings. But I love the nuance that he placed there of we're going to have one more proactive meeting to reduce the number of reactive meetings. And that really resonated with me. It is a huge part of this work, and you can hear it right in John's language of the high degree of collective efficacy that is being experienced personally for him and within the school. Being able to have such clear evidence of impact and transforming the conversation around that evidence of impact, you can see has such a huge part of the potential of shifting that conversation around, okay, so what could we do next? What's our next step? I also had written down that idea of we're unifying our purpose whilst recognizing our diversity. And I think that's so critically important in schools that are implementing the collaborative response work is that, yeah, we're unifying our purpose. We're getting us all pointed in one direction, but we're not dictating instruction, and we're not taking away from the diversity, which is a strength in our school. We're instead recognizing that that diversity makes us stronger. How can we leverage everybody's expertise as we go along? So much great learning that comes from John's sharing, and again, recognizing that idea of every child benefiting from the team structures that we put in place. So really encourage you, if you're listening to this prior to that collaborative response retreat that's happening in May, to check it out. John's going to be presenting the FG Miller further some of the work that they've done. So a great chance to be able to engage with him and the FG Miller story that they've worked on over the past couple of years. And as always, share, like, subscribe, continue to rate, review to help reach a growing audience for this work and to learn from the amazing opportunities that we've had to engage with sensational leaders, teachers at all different levels that are making this work come alive in their organizations in order to support the needs of all students. So with that, I wish you all the best. And normally it's my wife that gets to say this, but I'm going to take the advantage this time to be able to say, see you soon.
For more on collaborative response, visit jigsawlearning.ca or join the JL Insider to receive access to newly added resources and content. Make sure to follow us on social media. Subscribe to the podcast and the Jigsaw Learning YouTube channel to access past and upcoming episodes. Join us again to continue to build your own capacity in leading collaborative response in your context.